Okay, Lawrence.
So just waiting for the slides to load.
Yeah, sorry. Now it's my laptop that's decided to stop working. Great. Here we go.
Perfect.
Yeah. Here we go.
So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar number 34 in the Reclaim Network Plus webinar series. Next slide. So just a few slides intro to the network. So it's a network led by Professor Prashant Kumar in Surrey, and other core partners are myself, Laurence Jones at UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, Neria Calvillo at University of Warwick, Sheila Mallam at Bangor University, and Thomas Kjeldsen at University of Bath. And we have our network manager and project officer, Mark Simmons and Charlotte, who are helping run the webinar today. So the webinars we've run every month since the start of the network, pretty much, and they're going to continue until August this year. So it's the first Wednesday of every month. And we have 2 speakers in each slot, and then a time at the end for questions. And all previous webinars are recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. So network members, we've got over 670 so far, spanning a wide range of interest in terms of different types of green and blue infrastructure, and interest in terms of different challenges such as air pollution, biodiversity, mental well-being, etc. We've run a whole series of network activities. So we've funded projects, we've done synthesis studies, run workshops, secondments, etc. So you can find out more on the website. And we have our social media links as well, so we'll put those on at the end of the webinar. So the latest update on the website is the video recordings of our 3rd Reclaim conference, which took place in Surrey, Guildford on the 30th of January. So yeah, there's a video there if you want to catch up on all the different sessions and panel discussions that happened there. So let's move on to our 2 speakers today. So we have 2 fantastic speakers. So we have Dr. Issy Bray talking about GBGI and linked to quality of life in Bristol. So Issy will be on first. And then after Issy, we have Ben McCallan talking about green infrastructure in Guildford. So I will introduce each of the speakers before we move to their talk, but just so that you know the structure, there'll be around 15 minutes per talk, and then time for a shared Q&A session at the end. So if you think of questions as we're going along, please type them into the Q&A element of the webinar, and then we will put those questions to the speakers at the end. So feel free to put your name and affiliation as well if you want that. But please add in questions as we go. So let's move on to Issy. So let me just bring up Issy's bio. So Issy is an associate professor in public health, epidemiology, at the Centre for Public Health and Wellbeing at the University of West of England in Bristol. She's a member of the Faculty of Public Health through distinction. Her research is concerned with understanding the relationship between the environment and health, which has got strong relevance to Reclaim. So in particular, how access to urban green space can reduce inequalities in mental well-being. Much of Issy's recent work has been commissioned by policymakers such as Scottish Government, WHO Europe, and Bristol City Council. So I will hand over to Issy now. So thank you, Issy. And we're...
Hello, thank you very much, Laurence. So just need to share.
That's come up fine. So over to you.
Oh, I can't see it actually, which
okay.
I could,
well, we can
I could
see
when
it.
we
It's on...
practiced.
It's on
before.
full, yeah, it's on
Right, maybe I'll just go to
full
my...
public mode.
There we are. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm presenting this work, which is an interdisciplinary project funded by Reclaim on the role of green, blue and grey infrastructure in levelling up in quality of life in Bristol. So the background to this is that mental health, particularly for urban populations, is very much a growing public health concern. And it's really important that we understand how people relate to and feel a sense of belonging in the urban environment they live in. So we have mounting evidence about the importance of green infrastructure and blue infrastructure and how this affects the health and well-being of urban residents. And some emerging evidence about the benefits of certain grey features, for example, historic buildings and active travel routes. So our project seeks to explore the relationships between green, blue and grey infrastructure and a range of health and social outcomes in neighbourhoods across Bristol. So previous research has found associations between GBGI provision and health and social outcomes. So, for example, lower rates of depression in greener areas. But we really wanted to look at the mediating role of GBGI experience, so how people experience the infrastructure in their urban environment. So to do this, we used secondary data to assess relationships between neighbourhood measures of greenness, such as NDVI, and residential proximity of certain GBGI features, and people's experience of these GBGI, so how satisfied they are and how much they use them, with 4 health and social outcomes, which were neighbourhood satisfaction, life satisfaction, well-being, and general health. So we compiled data on GBGI provision from multiple open access sources and used data on GBGI experience along with health and social outcomes from the Bristol City Council Quality of Life Survey. So this survey provides an annual snapshot of the quality of life across Bristol. It's been running since 2001 and has approximately 3,000 to 5,000 responses every single year. It includes up to 190 indicators of quality of life and the well-being of residents, making it a very rich data source. So our project analysed data from the last 10 years, which was supplied at postcode level. We used spatial analysis and logistic regression models to explore the associations between GBGI provision and self-reported outcomes from the survey. So neighbourhood satisfaction, life satisfaction, well-being and general health were all treated as binary outcomes. And also we included GBGI experience, such as satisfaction and use from the survey, and other neighbourhood issues as well as predictor variables in our models. And then finally, we also controlled for demographics, socioeconomic status in terms of both qualifications and income and calendar year. So this table shows the data we had available on the provision of green, blue and grey infrastructure. So for green, we have tree canopy cover and normalised difference vegetation index, which is just really a measure of greenness of an area. And then also access to green space, to woodland, to conservation areas, to outdoor sports facilities, and also the coverage of private gardens, so the percentage of an area that's covered by private gardens. You can see that for blue infrastructure, we had a lot less data sources available. So we really just have access to water bodies. And then for grey, we have quite a good list. So we have access to cycle networks, rail networks, bus stops, roads, social infrastructure, leisure centres, and also the density of historic and listed buildings, which we thought might be important, and just the percentage coverage of building, so how built up an area is essentially. So these variables were calculated as network distance from the postcode centroid, or as an aerial measure based on a 10-minute walking area. So data about people's experiences of GBGI in terms of satisfaction with green space and with grey infrastructure were collected through the Quality of Life Survey, as well as data on other important neighbourhood issues such as a sense of belonging to your neighbourhood, feeling safe in your neighbourhood, and problems such as noise, litter and dog fouling. The pictures on this slide contrast a well-used park in the centre of town with a space in the middle of a 1930s housing estate in South Bristol, which is rarely used by the residents. And they're there to illustrate why it's so important to consider the quality of green spaces and how they're perceived by the local residents. And then the third photo is of a small train station in North Bristol. So for each outcome, we fit a model with all GBGI provision and experience variables controlling for calendar year, and we retain the statistically significant variables in the model. And then we control for demographic variables, which are confounders, and socioeconomic status in both terms of both qualification and income. And then we interpret that final model. So the R-squared values you can see in the second table there show the proportion of variation in the outcome that can be explained by the final model. And you can see that that ranges from, say, 30 to 40% for neighbourhood satisfaction, which is quite good, down to 10% for well-being, which is not so good. So that gives you an idea of kind of how good these final models are at explaining what we're trying to understand in terms of those outcomes. So next, I'll go through each of those four models for those four outcomes one at a time and explain which variables we found to be significant predictors. So this is the final model for neighbourhood satisfaction. Most of the variables are on a scale of 1 to 5, ranging from very unsatisfied to very satisfied. So for neighbourhood satisfaction, the most important predictors relate to neighbourhood characteristics, such as sense of belonging, safety, and problems such as litter and noise. But green space satisfaction is also really important. So from that number there of 28%, we see that a change in, say, from satisfied to very satisfied with your green space increases the likelihood of being satisfied with your neighbourhood by 28%, so quite a big effect. Satisfaction with many aspects of grey infrastructure is also important, so museums, leisure centres, buses and libraries. Interestingly, we actually see a negative effect of living or sports facility, which might be explained by the fact that they generally serve a larger area than just the local neighbourhood, and they often require paid membership to benefit, so thinking about things like golf clubs. So perhaps actually living near an outdoor sports facility isn't quite as beneficial as we might initially have thought. For life satisfaction, many of the same variables are still important. So neighbourhood belonging, safety, noise. Importantly, green space satisfaction and private and leisure centre satisfaction are all important predictors. But they have smaller effect sizes than they did for neighbourhood satisfaction. So they're not having quite such a big effect on life satisfaction. There are a number of unexpected and negative associations here, which I'm going to run through now. But that's negative effects associated with private garden coverage, with distance to bus stop, to nearest bus stop, and the density of historic and listed buildings. So, yeah, we were a bit surprised to find that a higher percentage of private garden coverage is associated with a lower life satisfaction. But we think we can explain this in terms of the fact that Clifton and other areas of terraced housing are less deprived than the housing estates on the edge of the city, which actually would have bigger gardens. So in fact, I think what it shows is that we haven't fully controlled for the effects of socioeconomic status. And then being close to a bus stop has a negative effect on life satisfaction, which wasn't what I expected to begin with. But actually, when you look at a map, you see that all the bus stops are on the, well, a lot of them are on the main arteries in and out of the city. So they're going to be very busy with traffic and noise and pollution. So actually, that does make sense. And then finally, the historic and listed buildings will be in the centre, well, they'll be mostly in the centre of town. So where there'll be more rented accommodation and the accommodation will be more probably crowded and noisy. So we think we can explain these somewhat unexpected findings, but very interesting. So moving on then to well-being. you can see that there are less variables that we have found are significant predictors of wellbeing from our GBGI provision and experience list. But green space satisfaction is still important and has still an effect size of 5%, which is comparable of that which it had for life satisfaction. Distance to rail station has a small positive effect. So if you live smaller to a rail station, that's going to have a small positive effect on your wellbeing levels. But the R-squared value, so the proportion of variation in wellbeing that we can explain with all of these variables, is really quite low. This was the least good model fit. So I think what we need to take from this is just that it's quite hard actually to predict wellbeing from the variables that we have here. And then finally, moving on to general health. So in fact, no GBGI provision or experience variables were significant predictors of general health, which is interesting in itself. The demographic factors, such as disability, sex, ethnicity, being off permanently sick or unemployed, and socioeconomic status were all highly significant. So it suggests that these are the things that are really important in predicting our health. After controlling for all of those, building coverage was marginally significant. And the smallest p-values for GBGI variables were NDVI and green space use. So there are some positive effects of higher percentage building coverage and greener areas and use of green space, but they're just not so statistically significant. So to summarise those four models, I've put in the most important variables for each of the outcomes that we're interested in. And I've used green for the green infrastructure and satisfaction with green infrastructure, grey for the grey infrastructure and satisfaction with that, and then black text for the other things. And hopefully that helps to sort of show it in a slightly different way. And what you see is that green space satisfaction runs through as important for 3 out of those 4 outcomes. Another way of looking at it, which I like, is like this. So what I synthesize from all of those findings is that neighbourhood characteristics are really the most important thing for your neighbourhood satisfaction, and then they're somewhat important for life satisfaction too. Satisfaction with green and grey infrastructure, again, is highly important for neighbourhood satisfaction, somewhat less for life satisfaction, and then having a smaller effect on well-being. And then going in the other direction, we see that socio-demographic variables are highly important for your general health and then have a lessening effect as you go through well-being, life satisfaction and neighbourhood satisfaction. So in summary, we found there's limited secondary data available about blue infrastructure in the city. We found that GBGI satisfaction predicts neighbourhood satisfaction more than socio-demographics do. For both life satisfaction and well-being, a wide range of GBGI provision and satisfaction variables are significant, but socio-demographics were also important in there. And then there are less strong associations between GBGI variables and general health once you've controlled for all the socio-demographic variables, the confounding variables. So in summary, satisfaction with green space was the most important predictor of the quality of life outcomes that we considered. Areas in South Bristol have similar NDVI or green space access, so that's greenness or number of parks near you, to areas in North Bristol. But satisfaction in these areas is much lower in South Bristol, and it's a much more deprived area. And having lived in South Bristol, I can say that some of those parks which I was visiting in lockdown were not particularly pleasant. Garden area has a negative relationship with life satisfaction, emphasising that access to green space in itself is not an effective measure. So we feel, based on all of this, that the consideration must be given to the quality of green space and other improvements to neighbourhood infrastructure. So it came across so importantly that things like dog fouling and litter and noise are the most important things. It's almost as if you see a sort of hierarchy of needs, so that satisfaction with green and grey infrastructure is important, but only once you have addressed basic needs, such as feeling safe and feeling part of a community. So in terms of outputs, we are writing a paper which isn't quite out yet, but I just wanted to flag up that we have a really nice story map that goes into a bit more detail about some of the things I've talked about today. So I've given the link there, and this is just one map that you can access through the story map, and it allows you, I don't know if you can see, you can sort of turn on and off different types of infrastructure. So there you can see in the darker green woodland across Bristol, and in the lighter green that's private garden coverage. So you can play around with that and see the different types of infrastructure. And then you can also look at the outcomes on a map as well and see the sort of correlations between the two. And we've also gone into some detail about how to explain some of the more unexpected findings from our analysis. And then finally, there's also a video that has been created and a sort of animation, and I've given the link to that there as well. So thank you very much for listening. I shall end my slideshow and look forward to taking questions.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Issy. Really nice to be able to kind of link data to kind of green space characteristics. It's quite a challenge, and you've illustrated some of the really nice findings from that. So thank you. Please put your questions in the Q&A box if you've got any questions for Issy, and we'll take those at the end. And now I'd like to move on to Ben. So Ben studied physical geography at Royal Holloway and has stayed in Surrey since graduating, and he has a particular interest in local community organising on the climate crisis over the last 4 years. Ben is focusing on creating collaborative solutions to help bring residents, councils and businesses together to tackle climate breakdown, but also has a particular interest in how the co-benefits of urban greening can help us remodel our towns and streets in an effort to adapt to a rapidly changing planet, as well as creating healthier and more enjoyable places to live as part of a combined strategy to reduce our carbon emissions. So thank you very much, and I will hand over to Ben now.
Thanks, Laurence. Charlotte, are you able to share my slides for me?
Yes, give me 1 second.
I'll just start chatting while you do that.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so thanks, Laurence. I'm Ben. I work for Surrey County Council. I'm the engagement lead across Surrey's Greener Future strategic priority from the Greener Futures group. One of the things I really like about the Reclaim Network is the sort of coming together of policymakers, community groups and charities, researchers, etc. And although I work for the local authority, I'm also heavily involved with a local charity, Zero Carbon Guildford. So I'm very much focused on the doing side more than anything else. And that's what I'm going to chat about today, specifically in what we've been trying to get off the ground as a bit of a pilot in Guildford. Next slide, please, which is I live just outside Guildford, between Guildford and Dorking, and the charity is set up in Guildford. So the charity itself started out about 5 years ago almost, actually, to the week, and we've got 3 main arms to us. We run a town centre premises called Zero that you can see on the left there. We also run a home energy advice service called Heat, the home energy advice team, and that's really successful. We did 423 visits this month to Surrey homes, and we also set up in partnership with the Uni of Surrey the Sustainable Business Network, and we've grown massively. We started out, as I say, 5 years ago with about 15 people and a donation of £1,250, and now we've got over 200 volunteers, and we've raised over £1 million in the last 2 years now as well. So we've made some really quick strides. Well, next slide, please. One of the things that we're focused on is how community groups can play a role in the local nature recovery strategy. So we've looked at something which Surrey Wildlife Trust mapped out called URBO, as Urban Biodiversity Opportunity Areas. And Surrey Wildlife Trust mapped 18 of them. There's 15 on this map because 3 of them aren't included because they are on neighbourhood plans that sit with parishes. And the goal of this is to try and reconnect the habitats across Surrey that are fractured by development or urban areas. So, for example, where you can see the turquoise patch to the sort of middle left there, that's Guildford town centre, and that you can see the greenery around it. The town centre in Guildford actually splits two pretty critical habitats. So it splits the national landscape to the south of the town, and to the north it splits ancient woodland. And so what we're looking to do is try and build corridors that can help actually reconnect some of these habitats, but bring all these co-benefits that, well, we've just been hearing about from Issy as well. So how it can help tackle air pollution, how it can help well-being, how it can help flood resilience along those lines, and particularly how that can help with engagement of a really diverse set of people, and not just focusing on those that you might say were in the climate bubble or already identify as environmentalists. Next slide, please, Charlotte. And so within this project will sit within the local nature recovery strategy. So you're probably aware, but there's 48 of these across the UK. Surrey County Council is the statutory body responsible for delivering Surrey's local nature recovery strategy, which has been branded Surrey Nature Recovery. And within it, there are 5 priority chapters that have been listed. You can see them on the screen there, but importantly, one of them is urban areas. And it was really important through the engagement process, kept coming up time and again, that residents felt this was a hugely important part to include. So really good that we got so many people working across this to learn from the UK. We ran 6 in-person workshops, which had 2 more sessions to help determine the priorities. So this isn't just something that's been, designed behind closed doors at the local authority. It's involved a wide range of stakeholders from across the county, hopefully to not just become, another local authority policy. I think, if there's one thing we don't need more of, it's just policies that don't go anywhere. So there's, from the ground up, we've tried to involve everybody that can actually help deliver this. And it'll be tricky because there's not a lot of extra funding that goes with this. And I imagine that is similar for a lot of the organisations delivering local nature recovery strategies. But it's really important that urban areas are in there because, as I say, it is a key part of the puzzle to try and figure out as we look to reverse nature loss. Surrey is actually above average for nature and biodiversity loss. We're not entirely clear on why that is at the minute. It may be because we started with a higher baseline, but 11% of Surrey's native species have gone extinct in the last few decades. So it's really critical that we start thinking, not just about countryside and habitats and loss of them from development, but also what these fractured pieces mean in terms of the bigger picture, and why the ethos of the Reclaim Network is so important to helping deliver on that by providing these links through these urban areas. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So this is the map of Guildford. This is zooming into the urban biodiversity opportunity area map that we saw for the whole of Surrey. This is what Guildford town centre looks like. And as I said, this was mapped by Surrey Wildlife Trust. And it's now going to sit under the local nature recovery strategy. And what we're trying to do as a bit of a pilot to try and see what the obstacles are to delivering this, and there's lots, I would say, as well, is to understand how to engage successfully on it and how to actually start delivering. So to start building out these green corridors. Some of the areas within these green corridors are already greened areas, so they're either marked to be protected or upgraded. But there's lots of parts of this as well where we really need to start putting in new measures to help with this, particularly suited to the surroundings of where they actually sit. And there's been loads of enthusiasm for this, but as we all know, it is one thing having a lot of enthusiasm. It's another thing turning that into actual delivery on the ground. So we've been trying to go through a bit of a strategic approach to this, to put a number of different projects in to see how we can help catalyse further action. And I'm going to run through some of those quickly now. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So first of all, this was one of the first things we did, working with Prashant as well as parents from a local school, Sandfield Primary, and we put in green screens around the edge of the school. And what we found was that the gap in the gates was acting like a bit of a funnel for air pollution. So we installed together the first living gate there. first living gate in the UK, which you can see in the picture there. And it's reduced, Prashant's team, G-Care, monitored before and after, did some robust air quality monitoring there, and we found that the reduction on site was 44%. So children being exposed to significantly less air pollution thanks to these interventions. And that was funded by Reclaim Network when it first kicked off. So that was one of the first things that we did, and was a really successful one, I think. It also brought down noise pollution by about 6 decibels on site. So really good impact on that. Next slide, please, Charlotte. We also put a sedum roof in at nursery. They had absolutely no greenery in the playground. So this was something to engage the children there, get them talking to their parents. So it's a good way to tie education into what's going on. And it looks lovely. It's still blossoming really well. We did this through the charity with a small grant that we got. Let local organisations apply, and the nursery won the contest. So we went and put the sedum roof in for them there, and they absolutely love it there. It's been a real success. They put it in their newsletters, social media, etc. So it started spreading a bit more awareness of what schools could do around this. It's hard for us to keep going out to deliver stuff as a charity because we don't have endless pots of money, unfortunately. So it's a bit of one of the first challenges I would raise is how to keep securing funding to keep this sort of even small scale project going. The second one being you've got to have someone on site committed to maintenance. Otherwise, obviously, you end up with something that looks less than pretty if it starts dying off. So those were 2 really obvious challenges that we sort of ran into straight away from the start. Next slide, please. This is a living pillar. So we've just put one of these in on at the bottom of Guildford High Street. And what we've done, if you've got a Debenhams in your area, you'll know they're mostly all being demolished. We've got one being turned into a new block of flats at the bottom of Guildford High Street. And there's going to be a public garden at the bottom of it, which they're designing around biodiversity. Then you've got a main road, and we've put this pillar on the other side of the main road there to try and transition hopefully into the high street so more stuff can start spreading up from the urban greening front. So we didn't have any of these. If you've walked down Clapham Junction High Street recently, you'll have seen the whole stretch down. They've got a load of lovely looking living pillars there. So same company came, Angus from Scottscape, who's helped on a couple of projects around Surrey. It looks great. It still needs to blossom a little bit, but what we're hoping is that this is a bit of a conversation starter in what local authorities, community groups, etc. can do. So they're quite expensive. They're not cheap, but they look really good. They've got, bird boxes, bug hotels, etc. in them. And hopefully this is conversation starter about why we need to start talking about urban greening more. Next slide, please. Then we've just, within the last month or 2, installed a reflection garden at a school, which sits in a ward within Surrey's key neighbourhoods. We have 20 key neighbourhoods in Surrey identified by the Index of Multiple Deprivation. This school is in a ward which has the least access to green space of all wards in Surrey. And they've got a lot of students there on school meals, free school meal vouchers, kids who have, various SEND needs. And they need a bit of quiet space to go and chill out sometimes. So we built this reflection garden. It's obviously pretty sparse at the minute because it's only just gone on and we're just starting to come to spring. But we've planted a load of climbers around that arbour there so that they've just got a nice quiet sheltered place to sit and be around nature. And that funding came from the Bupa Greening Grant, which is administered by the charity Groundworks, who do a lot of grant administration. Next slide, please. And then I think finally, one of the other things we've done in the last couple of months is we've got a school just outside Guildford in one of our boroughs, and the classrooms keep getting flooded there. The playing fields, the way that you're looking at there, sit on a higher level, and all the rainwater is running off them. So we've planted a load of about 300 individual trees there for climate resilience, really. So it's a good sort of message around some of the impacts that we face and why green-blue infrastructure can be helpful with this, because it's not just that the playgrounds are getting flooded and the classrooms might be unusable, but if kids can't go to school, maybe parents can't go to work, which has a knock-on the local economy. It has other knock-ons for kids' mental health and well-being, etc. So what we're trying to do with a lot of these projects is think about the messaging that we put out alongside it and engage, as I say, outside of the usual suspects so that we can try and get more people involved in this, find more sites for it, not be entirely reliant on grant funding that we've generated ourselves, and see how we can start trying to develop this in line with that green map of Guildford that we looked at before, where the corridors are. And at the minute, obviously, it is, you know, we've done a few things between the local authority, local community groups. It's a bit of a drop in the ocean, really, compared to what we've got to do, not just in the map of Guildford, but obviously Surrey-wide plus UK-wide, if we're going to start really ramping up the level of GBI that's going to help tackle a lot of these issues. So we've tried to do it strategically with good messaging to accompany it, but as I say, you know, it does feel like a drop in the ocean sometimes. But you've got to start somewhere, and so we've tried to do it in a way that really sells lots of these co-benefits and a bit of a shared destiny narrative from the behaviour change angle to get more people involved in what we're trying to do. I think that's the end. Next slide, please. Oh no, one more. Sorry, I forgot about this one. So we also, the first one that we got. Successfully got a CSR, corporate social responsibility donation for. We've managed to just put a little biodiversity garden on top of a local shopping centre, which is great because we've been really struggling to get much funding from businesses, and the challenges with businesses, which are obviously the main stakeholder in a town where you've got the highest urban heat island effect. And you're most likely to need GBI for, you know, mitigation of overheating, etc. Means we've got to work with businesses and landlords, but often the business doesn't own the building. So then you've got to go off and find the asset manager. They may not be particularly interested. It might just be part of a massive portfolio. So it's really good that we managed to crack this nut once, and hopefully this spreads a little bit more engagement from asset managers and businesses. And they chipped in alongside a grant we got from Surrey Wildlife Trust. And we turned what was like an extreme heat trap, where they had this table set out there and was surrounded by plant and pretty ugly machinery. Next slide, please, Charlotte. Into something that was a lot nicer. So we've installed a sedum roof there. We've managed to, we haven't actually done a follow-up monitoring of the temperature yet, but we've managed to plant all around it. So they're shielded from most of the plant now. They've got a nice bit of greenery to sit on. So hopefully, as I say, this is something that we looked at with the goal of inspiring, making a bit of a case study out of, to inspire more businesses to get involved as part of their CSR targets. Next slide. That was the last one, that one. That's me done. I'll pass back over to Laurence.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. Yeah, really inspiring to see all these sort of little projects that, like you say, it is a drop in the ocean, but I think it does make a difference because it starts to raise people's awareness of the issues, and it kind of think, you know, it helps people think, you know, what can I do? I can do something that does make a difference.
Hopefully, yeah, and it's all we can do really as a small community group. So we're doing the thing we can do. So yeah, hopefully it makes a difference.
Fantastic. We've got plenty of time for questions, so thanks both speakers for keeping to time so well. I will hand over to Prashant now to run the Q&A.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Laurence, and fantastic presentations from both our speakers, Issy and Ben. I've got a couple of questions there, but I would also ask again the attendees to just use the Q&A box and write their questions. You might also need put your name, actually, if you want it to be, you know, put name and affiliation with your question. So I think the first question is from for Issy. This is from Yarden Wolf. Thank you for the presentation. Looking back, what other methods you might have deployed to mitigate some of the limitations you mentioned, or anything else you would do differently if you had more time?
Thank you, Yarden. So I think in terms of the socio-demographics, the fact that we haven't managed to control properly for deprivation, obviously we're a bit restricted because it was analysis of secondary data. So ideally, we would like more socioeconomic variables, but it's quite hard for us to get those. So we were limited, and I think there's no wonder then that we found some residual confounding. But however, some of that, those unexplained findings or unexpected findings. I think we could have understood better if we'd included, for example, distance to the centre. So quite a lot of it was about where people lived within the city, and there was a certain sort of negative effect of living right in the centre, and then another negative effect of living in the peripheral housing estates, with a sort of golden spot in between, if you like. And I wish that we'd included a variable that was distance from the centre, because I think we could have understood that non-linear trend in the wellbeing outcomes much better if we had. So that in the future would be interesting to include. And then in terms of the unexpected finding about living near a bus stop, and we decided that was because the main roads were full of traffic and therefore, of course, noise and air pollution. If we could have included data on noise and air pollution, then we would have been able to control for the negative effects of living near a main road, but we might then have been able to understand if there are any positive effects, which is what we were expecting, of living near the grey infrastructure, of having access to public transport, to bus stops, which we think should be a good thing. But instead, it was coming out as a negative thing because we hadn't properly controlled for the negative aspects of the main road. So I think, how much of that data would have been available, I'm not sure, but I think if we'd had more time and more resources, or if I was to do it again, there would be other types of data that I would want to be including, certainly. And then in terms of the analysis itself, it would have been good to have done something like a structural equation modelling rather than just a regression, where we put in all of the exposures and the satisfaction and use variables as explanatory variables. It would be good if we could have had a sort of causal pathway where we went from the exposure variables to satisfaction with green infrastructure, to use of that, on then to the outcome. So if we could have ordered those and had a sort of a causal model, which we could have done with structural equation modelling, I think from a methods point of view, that would have been certainly an improvement.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So, Issy, there is another question for you, which is from Fiona Cleed. Were you able to pick up any facts related to changes within the 10-year time period? For example, the development of UWE's St. Matthias campus as a housing estate has increased the area of private gardens in BS 162. I don't know what does this mean actually.
So just one of the areas, So I think we were probably hoping to be able to do a little bit more of analysing the effects of individual interventions like that. But in fact, we sort of had our hands full analysing the very large quantity of data that we had already. So no, we haven't used the data we have to look at the effects of particular interventions like that housing development. But what I can say is because we included calendar year in all of our analyses, although we didn't report on that today, we do have effects for calendar year, and unfortunately they are mostly going downwards. So it's a little bit depressing, and it's important that we controlled for that. But those outcomes I'm talking about, generally the trend was downwards over time, obviously with sort of blips, which might be to do with what's going on economically at the time or whatever, and of course COVID and that sort of thing.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So I've got a question actually for Ben. Ben, I think these are really good initiatives to create actually those case studies, especially like the gate and the pillar, as well as now the green roofs. I think there are two of them actually. I guess one of the key things actually for these initiatives are to produce basically the evidence base, that what exactly they're doing apart from the aesthetics, right? So, and this is where the Reclaim Network has been pushing really hard actually to create that those evidence base and the case studies so that they can be rolled out in other places. So the question really is that do you have any plans actually for producing that sort of database? Because I could see that opportunity to work together possibly, because these are a couple of these different sites where we could consider them. But I just wanted to know from your perspective, let's say, what's the plan? And if, let's say, nothing happens, then how you convince others to say that this is really working, apart from looking nice?
Yeah, and that is definitely one of the challenges, I think. And to just go into it a little bit further, I think one of the tricky parts of this is because we're having to generally generate funding and we can't necessarily commit to doing anything until we've got the funding secured, we're then limited by a time window, right? And if the site hasn't been doing any monitoring before, we've quite often got a really short funding window. For example, the one that you saw there with the reflection garden, that was like a few months to actually deliver the project. So there is not really much opportunity from getting the funding agreed to going and finding the site to put it in to then actually doing any of the pre-intervention monitoring as well. And this continues to be a bit of a challenge, really. So the school that I mentioned that was flooding, all we've really got for that is their sort of anecdotal evidence on it. And ideally what we would do is have a much longer lead-in period. Like obviously we managed, Sandfield was obviously a bit of a different scenario, but you obviously did a load of great monitoring there so that we knew exactly, you know, what the longer term trends were for air quality, and then we could monitor it well afterwards. We haven't had really another opportunity since then where we've had any sort of window to be able to do any of the pre-intervention monitoring. And I think it is another real challenge to add to the, you know, ever-growing list of it. And I think it's something we should probably definitely discuss, because yes, we would like to have all of this stored up somewhere so that we can sell the benefits to people. And I think one of the important things that's missing at the minute as well is working for local authority. You quite often get the response where it's a nice idea, but it's going to cost too much. And I think one of the things I would really like to do is be able to say, well, sure, it's going to cost, you know, X pounds to do this, but here's the potential implications in the long run from damage to infrastructure, local economy, etc., if we don't start doing this everywhere else. So yeah, I'd be really happy to try and figure out a way forward for this, and maybe start looking at some longer term funding pots as well, that actually mean we don't have such a narrow delivery window that makes it hard to do the before and after monitoring. One of those big funding pots, the National Lottery and Heritage have teamed up for effectively, I suppose it's like a load of interventions that can include GBI, and we have put a bid in as the local authority, but it was something like 17 times oversubscribed across the UK. And being Surrey, you know, we're definitely not one of the counties that is most in need of extra funding, I suppose, when you just look at, you know, the general wealth of the areas of the country across different counties. So it's quite tricky to get those big funding pots where we know we can do it as well. So I think definitely a discussion on this would be really welcome as to how we can start monitoring stuff in a much better way, rather than relying on anecdotal evidence to begin with and then actually doing the monitoring after the intervention, which is obviously not the ideal scenario.
Yeah, I believe the key there is because the monitoring sometimes is also specialized, and there are always ways actually to find out the data, even if the things have been done. There are different ways of comparing the interventions. So I believe that the collaboration becomes quite key actually with the academic partners, because the funding is an issue, but if there are good, the good kind of synergies with the academic partner, then they could possibly put as part of their plans. I could see that there are lots of opportunities here, and if, let's say, this case study is completed in a sense that you see what's been done, what the costs associated with it, what this ecosystem services providing over time, then it can possibly be something to take forward to the policymakers or to the individuals actually who might want to make a case for the funding to put similar things other places. So maybe that could be a discussion to possibly have separately. I could see that there are some opportunities there, and also keeping ahead of plan, when you're planning certain things in the loop, making aware, that could also help actually to see whether things are possible at the time frame. I would not expect actually as a charity to complete to do everything, because certain things are expensive, especially the monitoring, analysis, creating the data, analyzing it, writing it up, comprehending, and so there's quite a lot into to doing that.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have any other specialists to. I mean, you remember when we did the air quality monitoring, finding someone to do the data on that was tricky enough, wasn't it? So yeah, we'd be really open to that, I think. And obviously, a lot of what we've done so far was a pilot around the engagement side of things and to try and understand the obstacles there. So I think if we can get lots of other community groups across Surrey trained up to start doing similar sort of small scale, but hopefully catalysing actions, we should hopefully get quite a lot of opportunity to do that. So I think it's definitely worth the discussion to see how we can do that, Prashant.
Perfect, yeah. So are there any questions from other, maybe I'm not seeing it in the Q&A, or maybe there's one more actually. Get ready for testing. Yeah. I think it just possibly comment from Fiona again for you, Issy. Want to get ready for testing if when Glenside campus development does go ahead. Yeah, it is. I think it's more like a comment there. So
I think there's a couple of questions from Lawrence as well.
Where are they?
So there's one for Ben. You gave a nice example at the end of businesses getting involved. How realistic is it to get more uptake from businesses or the public, for example, making changes in their gardens?
Well, that's a really interesting question, actually, because we sort of did this in two strands. I think it was in the writing in one of the first slides. We took the approach of doing this in two different strands because urban areas aren't just business. Obviously, there is a lot of gardens in there. And when it comes to our local nature recovery strategy, Surrey it's the most wooded county in England. So, and we've got quite a lot of protected areas as well. There's not like a huge amount with the local nature recovery strategy. You can't just include stuff that already has protected status. You've got to go above and beyond. And there's not like a huge amount in Surrey that we can actually do that to. But because it is quite a wealthy county, there is a huge amount of private gardens here. And actually, I think that if we just looked, I can't remember exactly what I calculated it to be now, but I think if we just looked at private gardens, if everybody took some measures, which, you know, I'm not being unrealistic about it. We're never going to get everybody to do it. But if every garden took some measures, it would make up something like 20% of our total share of the nature recovery strategy for the county. So I think it is a really important part. And we have been collecting we've been running some events, some for businesses, some for residents, and collecting examples of what people are doing in their gardens, mostly themed around stuff for nature, but then because, you know, they might not know the associated co-benefits, but then trying to bring it into the messaging as well. So I think that is a really interesting and important part of it, given the amount of private garden space we've got in the UK. I think how realistic is it with businesses? It is a challenge. I won't lie. There's lots of different challenges. We've got an event at the we're teaming up with the local BID, so the Business Improvement District. Ours is called Experience Guildford. They manage like a certain space around the town centre that includes something like 450 businesses. About 200 of those are independents. So they like part of the community, potentially, they might well do something. Again, the blocker comes where they don't own the building, and so it's a bit of a challenge to actually get them to do anything, even if they want to. So we're teaming up with the BID to have an event for businesses. I think it's 19th of March, so in a couple of weeks, and to try and get them looking at how they can start exploring some of this more. So there's the challenge of them not owning the premises themselves. But then there's the challenge of the organisations that do own the business, so do own the premises, sorry. So Guildford, for example, a huge chunk of it is owned by just a few asset managers. So probably a lot of you aren't necessarily familiar with Guildford, but where our original premises was, the First Zero, is down a parade of mostly restaurants, some shops, and that entire street is owned by one asset manager. And then you move up one row to where we did the rooftop garden. All of that strip is owned by another asset manager. And then there's one other massive asset manager that owns a whole other chunk of stuff. So it is quite tricky. I think potential ways in is that the borough council also do own some of the buildings there. So, for example, some of the business park land, they are still the landlords for that. So there may be more potential to do stuff on those business parks that are owned by the local authority as part of a local nature recovery strategy. But the downside to that is they're much less visible. So although you still get the benefits on one aspect, you don't necessarily get the engagement benefit from it. So it doesn't necessarily spread uptake of measures elsewhere. So, I mean, this is why we tried with one area to start with, is to figure out what these challenges were. And it turns out there's actually tons of them, and it is quite tricky. But that's not to say they can't all be overcome. And I think if we could figure out a way that we got lots of local community groups and charities working with local authorities to do this in different ways, we're not saying we've necessarily got the right way to do it, but if we're all doing it in different ways, hopefully somebody is going to crack that nut at some point and we come up with a really good model for how to best do it, how to get those asset managers involved. So unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for it, but I think some of it is suck it and see, and hopefully we find something from constantly refining what we're doing that will start to work. But yeah, I don't have a brilliant answer for the best way to do it, I'm afraid.
Okay, perfect. I can't see actually, by the way, those questions, Charlotte. So are there any other questions?
There was another one for Issy, if you wouldn't mind replying quickly. A technical question again from Lawrence. How did you reduce the Warwick-Edinburgh scale to a binary variable, and do you think that affected your findings?
So because we're using logistic regression, we needed the outcomes to be binary, so that's why we did that. We could have done some other sort of regression and had retained it as a scale, I guess. And I don't actually know, but because it's so long ago that we'd have done that, but my guess is we would have split it into two roughly equal groups. That's probably how we made that decision, I imagine. But yeah, I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head how we decided to divide it.
Great, thanks, Issy. I'll pass it back to Lawrence.
Lawrence, yes, I think that's it basically on the Q&A side. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prashant, for running the Q&A. So just to close then, so thank you all for coming today. Just a quick plug for our next webinar in a month's time on the 2nd of April. So we've got two interesting speakers from slightly different perspectives. Harriet White, who's the Woodland Creation and Tree Planting Project Manager for the NHS Forest, and she's giving a short intro to the NHS Forest programme. And then Felicity Harris, who's the Green and Healthy City Coordinator at Portsmouth City Council, bringing her perspectives to understanding considerations for accelerating green infrastructure within highway infrastructure in Portsmouth. So looking forward to seeing you at the next meeting. And just as a reminder, these are our links to the social media, and this webinar will be up and available as a recording on our YouTube site within a day or so. So thank you once again to our two great speakers, and thank you everyone else for attending.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you.
Bye.
Bye.